The city of Chicago was a sleeping beast at 4:30 a.m., its concrete and steel ribs rising into a sky the color of bruised ink. From his office on the 50th floor, Marcus Thorne could see its heart, a grid of slumbering lights. But the heart he cared about was right here, inside the gleaming glass tower of Titan Innovations. His heart, his creation, his burden. Being the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm meant you didn't own a company, you were owned by it. And being a black CEO meant you were owned by it twice over. Every success was scrutinized, every failure magnified. The pressure was a physical weight, a constant companion that sat on his chest and whispered that the fall was always one misstep away. This early hour, before the building awoke, was the only time he felt he could breathe. The silence was his sanctuary. Tonight, however, the silence was broken. As Marcus strode through the main lobby, his Italian leather shoes making soft, authoritative sounds on the polished marble, he heard it. Not the familiar hum of the ventilation, or the distant whir of a cleaning crew's floor polisher. This was the sound of friction. Human friction. Near the main security desk, a trio of Japanese businessmen stood stiffly, their expensive suits a stark contrast to their visible agitation. Their voices were low but sharp, a torrent of frustrated Japanese directed at a night shift security guard who could only offer a helpless shrug and outstretched palms. The new biometric security system, installed just last week, had failed to recognize their credentials. A minor glitch, but at 5 a.m., with a preliminary board meeting looming, it was a diplomatic incident in the making. Marcus's jaw tightened. This was exactly the kind of unforced error that made a company look amateurish. He was about to step in, to use the formal, textbook Japanese he'd painstakingly learned for moments like this, when another sound cut through the tension. It was a woman's voice. Soft, yet clear as a bell. Speaking in flawless, formal Japanese, she explained that the problem seemed to be with the system. She offered a profound apology on behalf of the company before assuring them she would grant them manual access immediately. Marcus froze, his hand halfway to his tie. The voice didn't come from an executive arriving early. It came from the shadows near the far wall. He turned, and his eyes landed on her. Amelia Hayes. He only knew her name because it was stitched onto the drab gray uniform of the custodial staff. She was the woman who emptied his trash can every night. A phantom who moved through the halls with her head down. So quiet and unobtrusive. She was practically invisible. Now, she was standing before the Japanese delegation, her floor buffer abandoned beside her. She performed a slight, respectful bow, a gesture so culturally perfect it disarmed the lead investor instantly. The investor's shoulders relaxed. They nodded, their frustration melting away into appreciative murmurs. Amelia then turned to the security guard, switched to flawless English, and calmly instructed him on the manual override protocol. It was like watching a ghost suddenly conduct an orchestra. Marcus stood motionless, a statue in his own lobby. He had spent a fortune on cross-cultural consultants and professional translators. Yet the most linguistically gifted person in his entire building was, until 30 seconds ago, polishing the floor he was standing on. As if the scene wasn't surreal enough, it happened again. Just as the Japanese men were being escorted to the elevators, a delivery driver burst in, his face flushed with panic. He held a crumpled invoice, jabbing a finger at it while speaking rapid guttural Polish. He was exclaiming that he was at the wrong address, that the urgent delivery was for the warehouse in Building B. Before Marcus could even process the second crisis, Amelia turned. The deference in her posture vanished, replaced by a friendly, direct efficiency. She switched seamlessly to the hard consonants and rolling R's of Polish, her voice warm and reassuring. A brief, animated exchange followed. She pointed him toward the correct service entrance, clarifying the building logistics with a faint smile. The driver's face flooded with relief. He thanked her profusely before hurrying off. 2 languages, 2 different cultures, 2 problems solved in under 3 minutes. By a janitor. A knot formed in Marcus's stomach. It wasn't anger. It was something colder, sharper. It was the chilling recognition of his own blindness. He had built his empire on a single principle: seeing value where others saw nothing. He'd gambled on overlooked engineers, obscure patents, and forgotten markets. Yet he had walked past this woman 100 times. His mind on stock prices and quarterly reports, and had seen nothing but a uniform. The waste of it, the sheer staggering waste of talent, felt like a personal failure. This wasn't just a skill. It was an asset, a weapon, and it was being used to scrub toilets. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his presence finally registering in the cavernous space. "Excuse me," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. Amelia flinched as if struck. Her head snapped toward him, and for a fleeting second, her eyes were wide with pure animal panic. It was the look of someone caught, of someone who believed being noticed was the most dangerous thing in the world. Her eyes darted left, then right, as if mapping escape routes. The calm, confident linguist was gone, replaced by a cornered woman in a janitor's uniform. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her gaze fell to the floor, her hands twisting the damp rag she held. Marcus softened his approach. He couldn't afford to scare her off. That was Japanese. And Polish. It wasn't a question. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes still fixed on his shoes. "You speak them fluently," he stated. Another nod. He closed the remaining distance between them, stopping a respectful few feet away. The air crackled with a strange energy's intense curiosity and her palpable fear. He could see the faint lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, the worn-out fabric of her uniform. He saw a story, a puzzle he felt an urgent need to solve. "I'm Marcus Thorne," he said, though he knew she knew. "I'm the CEO of this company." "I know who you are, sir," she said, her voice small. He took a breath. The boardroom tactics, the power plays, none of them would work here. He needed a different key for this lock. "I'd like you to come up to my office," he said. It was a request, but in the silent marble hall from his lips to hers, it sounded like a summons. "I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes." Amelia's head slowly lifted. Her eyes, a startlingly pale blue, finally met his. They held no trace of hope or excitement. There was only a deep, weary resignation, and a terror so profound it made the hair on Marcus's arms stand up. She looked at him not as a boss offering an opportunity, but as a judge about to deliver a verdict on a crime she'd long tried to bury. The elevator ride to the 50th floor was a journey through a vacuum. The mirrored walls reflected two figures who couldn't have been more different. Marcus, his posture exuding a calm, coiled power in his bespoke suit. And Amelia, who seemed to shrink inside her gray uniform, her reflection a pale, anxious smudge against the polished steel. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor indicator, each illuminated number a step closer to a confrontation she clearly dreaded. Marcus's office was a testament to his journey. It wasn't ostentatious, but every piece, from the sleek ebony desk to the abstract art on the walls, spoke of quiet, hard-won success. A floor-to-ceiling window offered a breathtaking panorama of Lake Michigan, now catching the first faint blush of dawn. It was a view meant to inspire, to command. To Amelia, it seemed to be just another cage, albeit a gilded one. "Please sit," Marcus said, gesturing to one of the two leather armchairs opposite his desk. She sat on the very edge of the seat, her back ramrod straight, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She didn't look around the room. Her focus remained entirely on him, a laser beam of wary attention. Marcus sat down, leaning forward slightly, creating an atmosphere of conversation rather than interrogation. "Amelia," he began, his voice even. "That was remarkable. Where did you learn to speak like that?" She finally spoke, her voice low and carefully measured, as if each word was weighed before release. "My father was in the diplomatic corps. We lived abroad. Japan, Poland, Germany, a few other places. It was plausible. It explained the languages, the cultural nuance, but it didn't explain the fear. Diplomats' daughters didn't typically end up scrubbing floors, nor did they look at a CEO like he was an executioner. He and my mother, they passed away a number of years ago," she continued, her gaze dropping to her hands. "An accident. I had to come home. Things were difficult. I took what work I could find. The story was clean, tragic, and symmetrical. It was a perfect, self-contained narrative of misfortune. And Marcus didn't believe a word of it. Or rather, he believed it was a carefully constructed wall, built from bricks of half-truth to hide whatever lay behind it. He'd interviewed thousands of people in his career. He knew the subtle tells of a prepared script, the lack of specific emotion, the clipped, factual delivery. It was a story designed to end questions, not to invite them. He decided to pivot. What other languages? She hesitated for a fraction of a second. German, Russian, some Arabic. And you work the night shift here. Cleaning, he stated, letting the incongruity of the words hang in the air. For how long? Almost 5 years, she answered, her voice betraying a hint of defensiveness. 5 years. 5 years of this staggering intellect being utterly dormant, at least professionally. The thought was galling. He looked at her, at the raw intelligence he could see flickering behind the veil of her fear. He didn't know her secret, but he knew one thing for certain. The woman in front of him was a resource he couldn't afford to waste. Pushing for the whole truth now would only make her bolt. He needed to give her a reason to stay, a reason to trust him. Amelia, I'm going to be direct, he said, shifting his tone to that of a CEO. Titan is in the final stages of a critical acquisition in Germany. The target is a company called BioLumen, a leader in advanced medical imaging. The deal is worth 9 figures, and it's falling apart. He saw a flicker of interest in her eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd shown. Our legal team says the contracts are solid. Our M&A team says the numbers work. But we keep hitting a wall. Every negotiation, every conference call, it feels like we're speaking a different language. Not literally, but culturally. We're missing something. The deal is stalling, and our German counterparts are growing impatient. He paused, letting the weight of the problem settle. I have a hunch. The problem isn't in the legal documents. It's in the nuances, the unspoken rules, the things a textbook can't teach you. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. This was the moment of truth. I want to hire you as a temporary consultant on this project. A 3-month contract. You'll report directly to me. Your compensation will be equivalent to that of a senior specialist. I want you to review the documents, sit in on the calls, and tell me what my highly paid executive team is missing. He watched her face carefully. He saw a war of emotions play out in the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slight widening of her pale blue eyes. It was a lifeline, but a lifeline that would pull her out of the shadows and into the blinding light. I'm a janitor, she stammered, the words sounding absurd, even to her own ears. And you're also the only person I've met who might be able to save this deal. Marcus countered smoothly. I'm not offering you a promotion. I'm offering you a contract, a specific temporary task. Prove to me that what I saw in the lobby wasn't a fluke. Prove to me you're as good as I think you are. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was calculation. She was weighing the risk of exposure against the agony of her current existence. She was weighing the danger of being seen against the slow death of being invisible. Marcus could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant mind. Finally, she looked up, her gaze meeting his with a new, fragile resolve. I'll do it, she said, her voice stronger now. But I have one condition. I'm listening. I want my involvement to be discreet. I'll do the work, analyze the communications, review the contracts. But I don't want a title. I don't want an office. I don't want anyone to know who I am or where I came from. Just a consultant. An anonymous one. It was an unusual request. But it confirmed Marcus's suspicion that she was hiding. For now, he could play by her rules. He needed her mind more than he needed her resume. Agreed, Marcus said, extending a hand across the desk. An anonymous consultant it is. Welcome to the team, Amelia. Amelia's new life began not in an office, but in a small windowless conference room on the executive floor that Marcus had designated as her temporary workspace. It was anonymous, sterile, and perfect for a ghost. Her uniform was replaced by simple, unassuming clothes she'd bought at a thrift store, allowing her to blend in as just another corporate drone. Her first task was a mountain of documents, contracts, email chains, and meeting transcripts related to the biolumin deal, all in dense, technical German. To Amelia, it was like breathing after being underwater for years. She worked with a quiet, ferocious intensity, her mind lighting up as she navigated the complex legal jargon and corporate speak. Within 2 days, she had a preliminary analysis for Marcus. "They think we're bulldozing them," she explained, standing before his desk. She wasn't just translating words, she was translating intent. "Our legal team's approach is too aggressive. It's standard American practice, but to the German board it reads as disrespectful. They see it as an attempt to strip biolumin of its identity, not merge with it." She pointed to a specific clause. "This indemnity section? We're asking for a unilateral protection. They see it as a vote of no confidence in their leadership. We need to redraft it as a mutual agreement." Marcus listened, impressed. She was seeing the cultural texture that his high-priced lawyers, focused only on legal exposure, had completely missed. He was right about her. But his decision had not gone unnoticed. It had created ripples, and one of those ripples had washed up at the door of Victor Vance. Victor, the executive VP of International Operations, was everything Marcus wasn't. He was a product of old money and Ivy League entitlement, a man who wore his privilege as easily as he wore his tailored suits. He saw Marcus's position as a token appointment, a diversity initiative run amok, and he resented every order he had to take. The failing German deal was his domain, and he viewed Marcus's direct intervention, especially using a consultant of unknown origin, as a direct assault on his authority. He made his displeasure known in a management meeting Marcus had called to discuss Amelia's initial findings. Amelia was present, introduced only as Miss Hayes, a linguistic consultant. With all due respect, Marcus," Victor began, his voice dripping with condescension, "my team has been handling this negotiation for 6 months. We have a dozen of the best M&A minds in the country on this. I hardly think the issue is a matter of tone." He glanced dismissively at Amelia. "Perhaps if our new consultant has any actual corporate experience, she could share it with us?" The room fell silent. It was a blatant power play, designed to humiliate Amelia and undermine Marcus. Amelia didn't flinch. She met Victor's smug gaze with her calm, pale blue eyes. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice steady, "my experience is in identifying patterns, and the pattern here is clear. In the last 3 conference calls, the CEO of biolumin, Herr Schmidt, has used the word partnerships, 17 times. Our team has used the word acquisition 23 times. He is talking about building a future. We are talking about a transaction. That is the core of the disconnect." Victor's smirk faltered. The room buzzed with low murmurs. She hadn't just offered an opinion. She'd backed it up with data. She had done her homework. The real test came a week later. A critical video conference with the biolumin board was scheduled. Marcus insisted Amelia attend, not just to translate, but to advise in real time. Victor fought it, but Marcus overruled him. The call was as tense as predicted. Herr Schmidt was polite but firm, raising concerns about post-merger autonomy. Victor, trying to reassert his dominance, launched into a prepared, aggressive defense of Titan's standard integration protocols. The mood on the German side of the screen turned frosty. Marcus, seeing the deal slipping away, muted his microphone. "Amelia, what now? Ask him about his company's legacy," she whispered urgently. "Don't talk about synergy or efficiency. Acknowledge what they've built. Show respect for their history." Marcus unmuted his mic. He cut Victor off mid-sentence, a move that made Victor's face flush with rage. Marcus turned his full attention to Herr Schmidt. Speaking slowly and deliberately, he began to talk about Lumen's founding, referencing a specific patent from the 1980s that had revolutionized their field. He spoke of it not as an asset to be absorbed, but as a legacy to be honored and amplified. He was using Amelia's script. The shift in the room was palpable. Herr Schmidt, a stoic old German, visibly relaxed. For the first time, he smiled. The conversation pivoted from a hostile negotiation to a collaborative discussion. By the end of the call, they had a breakthrough. Later that evening, as the offices emptied out, Amelia was packing her bag in her small, borrowed room. The hallway was quiet. She turned to leave, and Victor Vance was standing in the doorway, blocking her path. The polite corporate mask was gone. His eyes were cold, predatory. "I have to admit, you're good," he said, his voice a low sneer. He took a step into the room, forcing her to step back. The door clicked shut behind him. Her heart began to pound. But I can't shake this feeling, he continued, circling her slowly like a shark. That I've seen you before. You have this way about you, this quiet arrogance. It's familiar. Amelia's face remained a blank canvas, but inside, a cold dread was spreading through her veins. He stopped directly in front of her, his proximity a physical threat. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I thought maybe a conference in Berlin or a summit in Zurich, but no. It was closer to home. He stared into her eyes, searching, and then a slow, cruel smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, malevolent recognition. The final puzzle piece had clicked into place. My God, he breathed, the words a mixture of shock and triumph. I remember now. The dark hair, the fancy suits, always in the C-suite. You just look like hell now. He leaned in closer, his voice a venomous hiss that struck her like a snake. I thought your name was something exotic, something Russian. But I never forget a face. Especially the face of a train wreck. He paused, savoring the moment, watching the color drain from her cheeks. Elena Petrova. The fallen star of Omnicorp. The name hit Amelia with the force of a physical blow. Elena Petrova. It was a ghost she had spent 5 years and every ounce of her will trying to exorcise. Hearing it spoken aloud in this sterile conference room, by this man, felt like a violation. The carefully constructed walls of her new identity crumbled to dust, leaving her exposed, raw, and terrified. Her blood ran cold. Of all the people, in all the companies in Chicago, it had to be him. Victor Vance. She remembered him now, not as a major player, but as a jackal on the periphery of power at Omnicorp. A mid-level manager in the European division, always lurking in meetings, his ambition a palpable greasy sheen. He had been insignificant then. Now, he was the keeper of her apocalypse. Cat got your tongue, Elena? Victor taunted, his triumphant smile widening. Or should I stick with Amelia? It's so plain, so fitting for a woman who cleans toilets for a living. How the mighty have fallen. Amelia's mind raced, cycling through 1,000 frantic thoughts. Deny it? Useless. He was too sure. Run? There was nowhere to go. He had her. The life she had painstakingly built from scraps the anonymity, the safety of being invisible was over. What do you want, Victor? She asked, her voice a strained whisper. It was the only question that mattered. Want? He feigned a thoughtful look. What I've always wanted. What's mine? I run international operations. That German deal was my ticket to the executive board. My win. And you and your little circus act with Marcus Thorne waltzed in and stole my spotlight. He paced the small room, his movements agitated and aggressive. I left Omnicorp right before your little implosion. Smartest move I ever made. But I heard the stories. Oh, the stories were legendary. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Elena Petrova, the whiz-kid analyst, caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Corporate espionage. Selling secrets to the competition. Embezzlement. They threw the book at you. Fired, disgraced, blacklisted from the industry forever. A spectacular flameout. That's a lie. Amelia shot back, a spark of her old fire returning. You know it's a lie. Do I? Victor shrugged, a picture of callous indifference. All I know is what the official record says. And the official record is a very powerful thing. I imagine the press would have a field day with it. Titan Innovations miracle consultant is a disgraced corporate criminal. How do you think that would play out for your new protector, Marcus? A black CEO, already under a microscope, hires a known felon. The board would crucify him. The stock would tank. He had her trapped, and he knew it. Every word was a carefully aimed dart, poisoning not just her, but Marcus as well. So here's the deal, Elena, he said, pushing himself off the wall and advancing on her again. You're going to disappear. Quietly. You'll walk into Marcus's office tomorrow morning, and you'll tell him this job is too much for you. You'll thank him for the opportunity, and you'll walk out that door. You'll go back to your mop and your bucket, and I will never see your face on this floor again. You do that, and your dirty little secret stays safe with me." He paused, letting the threat sink in. "But if I see you here after tomorrow, I will burn you to the ground, and I'll make sure Marcus Thorne gets caught in the fire." As Victor left, closing the door with a soft final click, the room seemed to tilt. Amelia sank into a chair, her legs unable to support her. The past she had run from was no longer a memory. It was a living, breathing monster, and it wore Victor Vance's face. Her mind plunged back into the abyss of Omnicorp. She's Elena Petrova, 29 years old, head of strategic market analysis, the youngest person ever to hold the title. She's brilliant, driven, and on the fast track to the C-suite. Her world is data, algorithms, and predictive models. And her models have flagged an anomaly. A series of acquisitions through a network of offshore shell companies, all funneling back to one man. Alistair Finch, the Executive Vice President of Global Strategy. A man with a predatory smile and eyes as cold as a winter lake. She digs deeper, working late into the night, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. It's not just financial misconduct. It's bigger. Finch is selling proprietary Omnicorp, technology-sensitive biotech, and AI algorithms to blacklisted international buyers, using the shell companies to launder the profits. He's committing treason against the company for personal gain. She gathers the evidence-encrypted transaction logs, offshore account numbers, secret communications. A digital trail of irrefutable proof. She takes it to the one person she thinks she can trust, Omnicorp's chief counsel. It is the biggest mistake of her life. The counsel is Finch's man. The retaliation is swift and brutal. Within 48 hours, the narrative is flipped. An internal investigation is launched, but she is the target. The evidence she gathered is twisted, reframed. The data trails are rerouted to implicate her. She is accused of the very crime she uncovered. Her work computer is confiscated, her files wiped, her reputation systematically dismantled. Finch summons her to his office. He doesn't threaten her with termination. He threatens her with prison. He shows her photos of her 7-year-old son, Alex, playing at his school. A quiet, terrifying promise. She is ruined. Now, in the silent conference room at Titan, the old terror resurfaced, cold and suffocating. She could run again. She could pack her meager belongings, take her son, and vanish into another life, another city, another dead-end job. Let Victor win. Let the monsters have their world. It was the safe choice. It was the coward's choice. But then she thought of Marcus. He had looked past her uniform and seen her mind. He had given her a chance when the world had given her nothing but scorn. He had treated her with a dignity she thought she had lost forever. Running now wouldn't just be abandoning a job. It would be betraying the one person who had bet on her. It would mean letting Finch and his cronies win, not just in the past, but in the future. She sat in the dark for hours. The city lights outside twinkled, oblivious to the war raging inside her. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in her stomach. But beneath it, something else was stirring. A long, dormant ember of defiance. They had taken her name, her career, her reputation. They would not take this. They would not take her voice again. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. She found Marcus Thorne's contact information in the company directory. Her thumb hovered over the call button. This was the precipice. One press of a button, and there was no going back. She would either be saved or she would be destroyed. But she would not be silent. Not again. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she pressed the button. "Thorne," his voice answered. Crisp and professional. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her own voice shaky but clear. "It's Amelia. I need to see you. Tonight. There's something you need to know." Marcus was still in his office when her call came, poring over the revised German term sheets. The progress they'd made was undeniable, but a sense of unease still lingered. Amelia's story didn't add up, and a CEO who ignored his gut didn't stay a CEO for long. Her voice on the phone laced with an urgent, brittle fear confirmed his instinct. Something was wrong. "My office." 15 minutes, he said, then hung up. When she walked in, she looked like a different person from the terrified woman he'd met just weeks ago. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, almost dangerous resolve. The ghost was gone. In her place stood a soldier preparing for battle. She didn't wait for him to offer a seat. She walked to the center of the room and stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "My name is not Amelia Hayes," she began, the words stark in the quiet office. "It's Elena Petrova." Marcus remained silent, his expression unreadable. He simply listened, giving her the space she needed. For the next hour, the full story poured out of her. It wasn't the neat, tragic narrative of a diplomat's daughter. It was a messy, brutal tale of corporate warfare. She spoke of her meteoric rise at Omnicorp, her discovery of Alistair Finch's criminal enterprise, the high-tech secrets being sold to blacklisted regimes. She detailed how she had gathered the evidence, the betrayal by the company's legal counsel, and the swift, merciless campaign Finch had waged to destroy her. "He didn't just fire me," she said, her voice raw with the memory. "He framed me. He fabricated evidence, manipulated records, and painted me as a corporate spy. He threatened my family, my son." The mention of her son caused her voice to break for the first time. She quickly composed herself. "I had a choice: face manufactured federal charges and lose my son, or disappear. So I disappeared. I became Amelia Hayes. I took jobs where no one would ever look twice. A janitor's uniform is the best camouflage in the world." Quote, she told him about Victor Vance recognizing her, his threats, his ultimatum. As she spoke, Marcus felt a cold anger building inside him. It wasn't directed at her. It was the familiar, bitter anger he felt toward a system that allowed powerful men like Finch to crush anyone who stood in their way. He had fought that system his entire life. "He thought he had me," she concluded, her breathing heavy. "He thought I would run. I've been running for 5 years. I'm done running." And she reached into her bag and pulled out a worn, battered-looking object. It was an old generation USB flash drive. "This is why Finch didn't just make me disappear permanently," she said, placing it on the polished surface of his desk. It looked like a piece of forgotten junk in the pristine office. "I had a backup, a partial one. It's encrypted, and the key is a rolling cipher tied to a dead man's switch. If something happened to me, it would have been sent to a dozen journalists. Finch knew I had it. It's the only reason I'm still alive. It's not enough to convict him in court, made sure of that. But it would have been enough to trigger a federal investigation that he couldn't control." Hasta la mate. Marcus picked up the flash drive. It felt heavy, freighted with the weight of her stolen life. "Why show me this now? Why trust me?" Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "Because Victor isn't just trying to get rid of me. He's trying to sabotage you. And because you didn't see a janitor, you saw a person. I have to believe that person will see this through." Without another word, Marcus walked to his personal workstation, a secure, air-gapped terminal he used for his most sensitive work. He plugged in the drive. After a moment, a directory of encrypted files appeared. Amelia gave him the passphrase, a complex string of characters he recognized as a line from a classic Russian novel. The files began to decrypt. They were a chaotic collection of partial transaction logs, coded email fragments, and routing numbers for offshore accounts. It was, as she'd said, incomplete. A map with a gaping hole in the middle. But it was a start. Marcus's eyes scanned the lists of shell corporations and holding companies Finch had used. Most were meaningless, generic names registered in tax havens. But then one name leaped off the screen, hitting him like a physical shock. Sterling Ventures. His blood turned to ice. "Amelia," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Look at this." She came to his side, her eyes following his finger on the screen. She saw the name but didn't recognize its significance. Marcus stood up and walked to the large digital display on his wall, pulling up Titan's latest shareholder report. His finger traced down the list of institutional investors who had been buying up Titan stock aggressively over the last 6 months. The purchases were steady, strategic, and just under the threshold that would require a public disclosure of intent. The buyer was a private equity fund with a notoriously opaque structure. The name of the fund was Sterling Ventures. Marcus turned to face her, his mind racing, the pieces clicking into place with sickening speed. The failing German deal. Victor's sabotage. The sudden reappearance of her past. It wasn't a series of coincidences. It was a coordinated attack. He looked at Amelia, his expression grim. The anonymous consultant he'd hired to save a single deal had just handed him the key to saving his entire company. "This was never just about you," Marcus said, his voice low and intense. "Finch isn't just haunting your past. He's coming for my future." He held up the flash drive. "This stalemate is over. They've declared war." The dawn that broke over Chicago found Titan Innovations a company at war. The enemy was no longer a vague market competitor, but a predator with a name and a face: Alistair Finch. The battleground was not just the stock market, but the very integrity of Marcus's leadership. Marcus moved with the swift, cold precision of a general. His first call was to Sarah Jenkins, his head of Legala sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been with him since Titan was a garage startup. His second was to a discreet, off-the-books cybersecurity firm in the D.C. area run by ex-NSA operatives. By 7 a.m., a war room was established in a secure suite, 2 floors below the executive level, accessible only by Marcus, Sarah, and now, Amelia. Amelia's transformation was startling. The drab, anonymous clothes were gone, replaced by a sharp business suit Sarah had procured for her. The change was more than sartorial. It was psychological. Stripped of her janitor's camouflage, Elena Petrova began to resurface not the broken victim, but the brilliant strategist. She was given a workstation, a high-level security clearance, and access to every piece of data she requested. She was no longer a ghost. She was a weapon. The first shot from the enemy came 2 days later, just as Amelia had predicted. Alistair Finch, now CEO of a private equity group acting as a front for Omnicorp's interests, went public with a hostile takeover bid for Titan Innovations. The offer was cunningly priced, just high enough to tempt shareholders but low enough to be an insult. Simultaneously, a vicious smear campaign ignited online. Anonymous articles and coordinated social media posts appeared on financial blogs and forums, painting Marcus as an overextended, incompetent leader. They cited the stalling German deal as proof of his mismanagement. The most venomous pieces, however, were more personal. They hinted at a mystery woman, a janitor with undue influence, whispering a narrative of instability and erratic leadership from the top. It was a classic Finch playbook. Attack the foundation by attacking the leader. "He's using Victor," Amelia said, her eyes glued to a screen displaying network traffic analysis from the cybersecurity team. "The leaks are too specific. The language in these posts mirrors phrases Victor used in our management meetings. He's the inside man." Victor Vance, meanwhile, played his part perfectly. In meetings, he feigned loyalty, expressing grave concern over the takeover bid while subtly sowing doubt. "Marcus, are we sure we can fight this?" he'd ask, his face a mask of concern. "Perhaps we should consider the offer. It's a significant premium for our shareholders." He was poisoning the well from the inside, a snake masquerading as a trusted advisor. But he was up against a new opponent. Amelia, drawing on her intimate knowledge of Omnicorp's operations, became the architect of Titan's defense. She was a corporate Cassandra, predicting Finch's moves before he made them. "Finch will target our institutional investors in Europe next," she declared during a late-night strategy session. "He'll use his old network at Omnicorp's Frankfurt office to spread rumors about our tech pipeline being dry. We need to get ahead of it. Marcus, you need to fly to Berlin and meet with them personally. Reassure them. Show them the roadmap for the next 5 years." She analyzed the structure of Finch's shell companies from the partial data on her USB drive. He uses a tiered system to hide his cash flow. She explained to Sarah's legal team, sketching a complex diagram on a whiteboard. "The money moves through 3 countries before it lands in Sterling Ventures. Look for inconsistencies in the transaction reporting between the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg jurisdictions." That's his weak point. She was relentless, often working 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a 5-year-old hunger for justice. The fear that had once defined her was being burned away by the heat of the fight, forged into a cold, hard resolve. In the midst of the strategic chaos, a quiet moment provided a glimpse behind her armor. Marcus found her late one night, staring at her phone. A picture of a smiling, sandy-haired boy of about 12 was on the screen. "Your son?" Marcus asked gently. Amelia nodded, a soft, sad smile touching her lips. Alex, he's with my mother in a small town in Wisconsin. He thinks I have a boring office job here. It's safer that way. It must be hard, Marcus said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. The hardest part, she confessed, her gaze distant, is that he's starting to look at me and see a stranger. Someone who's always tired, always distracted. He doesn't know the woman I was before, the one who wasn't afraid. Marcus was silent for a moment. My own kids used to say I was more married to this company than to their mother. They weren't wrong. He looked around his gleaming, empty office. We build these empires, and sometimes we forget what we're building them for. It was a brief, unguarded exchange between two people from impossibly different worlds, now bound by a common enemy. The moment passed, and they were back to the fight. But a new layer of understanding had been forged between them. They weren't just fighting for a company anymore. They were fighting for the pieces of themselves they had lost along the way. The war for Titan Innovations had become a brutal stalemate. Marcus's trip to Germany had shored up support from their European investors, and Sarah's legal team was bogging Finch down in procedural challenges. But Finch was relentless, his deep pockets allowing him to sustain the pressure. He was slowly winning a war of attrition, swaying a few key, profit-hungry members of Titan's board with his sweetened offer. The air on the executive floor was thick with tension and whispered loyalties. They were holding the line, but the line was beginning to break. "We're fighting a defensive war," Marcus said grimly during a late-night session in the war room. "And defensive wars are lost, not won. We need a kill shot, something that takes Finch off the board for good." All eyes turned to Amelia. She was staring at the complex web of shell corporations she had mapped on the whiteboard. Her expression, one of intense concentration. "There is one," she said softly, her voice drawing every ounce of attention in the room. "When I was at Omnicorp, Finch had what he called his ARC, an off-the-books, fully isolated data server. It wasn't on the company network. He used it for his most sensitive transactions, the ones that constituted clear, prosecutable felonies. The smoking gun. "Where is it?" Sarah Jenkins asked, her pen poised over a legal pad. "A private, high-security data fortress in Zurich, Switzerland," Amelia answered. "My USB drive has the breadcrumbs, but the ARC has the whole loaf. If we can get what's on that server, we don't just stop the takeover. We put Alistair Finch in a federal prison." A heavy silence fell over the room. What she was suggesting was monumental. Accessing a private server in a Swiss data facility was bordering on the impossible. "It can be done," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the silence. He was already moving to his secure phone. He had contacts from his early Leaner Days people who operated in the gray areas of international security. "It's a high-stakes gamble, but it's the only one we have left." Within hours, Marcus had activated a discreet team of ethical hackers, based in Berlin specialists, in digital penetration testing, who were masters at exploiting the labyrinthine Swiss and EU data privacy laws. Amelia provided them with everything she remembered: server architecture, potential backdoors, and the psychological profile of the system administrator Finch had trusted. It was a long shot, a surgical strike that had to be perfect. While the Berlin team prepared their assault, Marcus and Amelia set a trap for the enemy within. They needed to neutralize Victor Vance. The bait was an elaborate fiction. Marcus called an emergency meeting with a select few, including Victor, to discuss a last-ditch survival plan. He laid out a fabricated strategy, a defensive merger with a major tech competitor, a direct rival to Omnicorp. The details were convincing, complete with falsified term sheets and a timeline for a press announcement in 48 hours. The entire plan was a ghost, designed for one purpose: to be leaked. "This cannot leave this room," Marcus concluded, his eyes sweeping over everyone present, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on Victor. "If Finch gets wind of this, he'll counter before we can act. Our entire company rests on your discretion." Victor's face was a perfect mask of solemn loyalty. "You have my word, Marcus." Less than an hour later, the cybersecurity team flagged an encrypted data burst from Victor's corporate laptop to an external IP address. The fish had taken the bait. The transfer was recorded, time-stamped, and logged. It was irrefutable proof of corporate espionage. The next 24 hours were agonizing. The war room was silent, save for the quiet hum of servers and the frantic clicking of keyboards. Amelia, Marcus, and Sarah watched a secure video feed from the Berlin team, a screen filled with scrolling lines of code. The hackers were chipping away at the Zurich server's defenses. Layer by layer, they hit firewalls, honeypots, and false directories. The tension was a physical presence, coiling tighter with every failed attempt. Then, at 3:17 a.m. Chicago time, a single word flashed on the screen in green text. Access. A collective, shuddering breath was released in the room. They were in. The lead hacker's voice crackled over the speaker. We have the primary directory. It's all here. Transaction logs, offshore wire transfers, encrypted communications with blacklisted entities. My God, this is the motherlode. They had done it. They had their kill shot. Marcus looked at Amelia, whose face was illuminated by the glow of the screen. For the first time, he saw not a trace of fear in her eyes. All he saw was the cool, satisfying glint of vindication. The game had changed. They were no longer the besieged. They were the hunters. The emergency shareholder meeting was Alistair Finch's coronation. He strode to the podium in the grand auditorium of a downtown Chicago hotel, radiating an aura of inevitable victory. The room was packed with Titan's shareholders, board members, and the financial press, all buzzing with anticipation. Finch had successfully painted a narrative of a faltering company needing a strong, decisive leader to rescue it. He had the votes. He knew it. His speech was a masterpiece of corporate predation, cloaked in the language of concern. He spoke of unlocking value, synergistic potential, and restoring shareholder confidence. He never mentioned Marcus by name, but his implication was clear. The current leadership was weak, distracted, and out of its depth. He even made a subtle, coded reference to internal instability and questionable personnel choices. A final, public jab at Amelia. It is time for a new chapter at Titan Innovations, he concluded, his voice resonating with false sincerity. A chapter of strength, clarity, and unparalleled growth. I urge you to vote in favor of this historic opportunity. He sat down to a wave of solid, confident applause. The chairman of the board, a man already swayed by Finch, moved to call the vote. One moment. A voice cut through the room. It was Marcus. He rose from his seat in the front row. Calm and composed. He walked not to the main podium, but to a smaller lectern on the side of the stage. All eyes turned to him. Mr. Finch has painted a compelling picture. Marcus began, his voice even and steady, commanding the room's attention. A picture of a company in need of rescue. But before we vote on Titan's future, I believe it's essential we all understand the past of the man offering to be its savior. A murmur went through the crowd. Finch's smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. For the past several weeks, Marcus continued, my team has been working with a special consultant to analyze not just market trends, but the nature of risk itself. She has provided an insight into our operations and our vulnerabilities that has proven invaluable. He paused, letting the suspense build. I'd like you to hear from her directly. Please welcome my special advisor for strategy and risk governance, Miss Amelia Hayes. A side door opened, and Amelia walked onto the stage. The transformation was absolute. She was not the timid janitor or the anonymous consultant. Dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, she moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from her core. She looked directly at Alistair Finch, her pale blue eyes holding his for a long, charged moment. A flicker of genuine shock, then alarm, crossed Finch's face. He recognized her. Elena Petrova, here, now. Amelia stepped to the lectern. Good morning, she said, her voice clear and amplified throughout the hall. Some of you may have heard rumors about me. Today, I'm here to provide the facts. What followed was not an emotional plea, but a cold, surgical dismantling of Alistair Finch's empire. With the precision of a prosecutor, she laid out the entire criminal conspiracy. She started with her own story at Omnicorp, not as a victim, but as the analyst who had uncovered the rot. Then, on the massive screen behind her, the evidence began to appear. The Zurich server's data, now organized into damning, easy-to-read charts and timelines. Encrypted emails, their content now displayed in plain text. Bank statements from offshore accounts. A detailed ledger of illegal technology, transfers to sanctioned nations. Each slide was a nail in Finch's coffin. The room, once buzzing, fell into a stunned, absolute silence. The hostile takeover of Titan Innovations, Amelia explained, her voice ringing with authority, was never about shareholder value. It was a corporate raid, orchestrated by Mr. Finch to seize Titan's proprietary AI technology, the very same way he plundered Omnicorp and to silence the one person who knew the truth about his past crimes, me. Then came the final blow. This campaign was aided by a traitor within our own company. On the screen flashed the encrypted data logs from Victor Vance's laptop, showing the transfer of the fabricated merger plan directly to a server owned by one of Finch's shell companies. In the back of the auditorium, Victor Vance went pale, looking as though he might be physically ill. Amelia's gaze swept across the room and finally landed back on Finch, who sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. The vote before you today is not about a merger, she concluded. It's about whether Titan Innovations will be a victim or a victor. The choice is yours. She stepped back from the lectern. The silence held for a beat, and then the room erupted. Not with applause, but with the chaotic clamor of outrage and revelation. Finch's allies on the board looked horrified. The press was in a frenzy. The takeover was dead. As security discreetly escorted a sputtering Finch and a shell-shocked Victor Vance from the premises likely toward federal agents waiting outside, vote was called. It was a unanimous, resounding rejection of the takeover bid. Titan was safe. Epilogue. 3 months later, the nameplate on the corner office next to Marcus's read, Amelia Hayes, Chief Strategy and Risk Officer. The position had been created for her, a role that leveraged her unique blend of analytical genius and hard-won wisdom. The company was thriving, its stocks soaring on the news of the thwarted takeover and the strength of its leadership. But the biggest change wasn't on the balance sheet. Marcus, with Amelia's guidance, had launched the Hayes Initiative, a radical, new internal development program. It offered mentorship, training, and educational grants to employees in every department, from the loading dock to the custodial staff, designed to uncover and cultivate the hidden talents within Titan's own walls. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus walked into Amelia's office. She was on the phone laughing. From the snippets of conversation, Marcus could tell she was talking to her son Alex. The sound was bright, free of the shadows that had once haunted her. She hung up and smiled at him. He just made the varsity soccer team. He wants me to come to the game on Saturday. You should go, Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe. I'll hold down the fort. I will, she said, and for the first time, it felt like a simple statement of fact, not a luxury. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the Chicago skyline. No longer a cage or a battlefield, but a landscape of possibility. You know, Marcus said, his voice thoughtful, when I hired you, I thought I was saving a valuable asset from being wasted. He looked at her, a deep respect in his eyes. I was wrong. You weren't the one who needed saving. Amelia met his gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. We saved each other, Marcus, and in the process, we built something better. He nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face. He knew she was right. They hadn't just won a corporate war. They had rewritten the rules, proving that the greatest strength of any organization isn't found in its stock price or its patents, but in its willingness to see the brilliance in unexpected places, and the courage to give that brilliance a voice.